Well, good afternoon, everybody. Today we have Reed Benet, who's going to be talking to us about biofuels and in particular biodiesel. One thing to note is that this talk is going to be on Google Video, so if there's anything that you're going to ask that might seem proprietary in nature, we ask that you come up afterward and talk to Reed about that stuff instead of in the regular question and answer period. So I met Reed, I guess, about 6 months ago and been talking to him on and off about biodiesel. And I, on the heels of the Vinod Khosla talk, who talked about ethanol, et cetera, I went over to see him and we started talking about the differences between ethanol and biodiesel and a lot of other things. And it seemed very appropriate for him to come and maybe tell all of you about it and keep the discussion going. So without further ado, Reed Benet.
Thanks, everyone. Actually, what Bill failed to say is he asked me a question and he got a 2-hour answer, so I'll hopefully be a lot faster than that. So out of curiosity, how many people here were at the Vinod Khosla? And how many of you asked questions? Those were really good questions and you made me nervous. How many people run biodiesel? We got 2, 3, 4. Great, okay. So as my wife reminds me, I'm too old to be a graduate student at UC Davis, where I am the biofuels graduate student. We just received $20 million from Chevron yesterday, and I wish I could get all of it, but I'm sure there are going to be others following us. So after Google, if you want to get into it as a graduate student, I don't recommend it, but you're welcome to talk to me about it. And actually, I have cards up here, and I don't, no question is too small. It's a great area and it's a lot of fun. So my outline, I'd like to suggest a solution so you know where I'm angling. Talk about context, give you a whirlwind tour of transportation, talk about diesel engines, which I have a Jones for, a whirlwind tour of fuels, emissions, and why transportation is a crux issue. Talk about plug-in hybrids. I don't know if you saw the unauthorized announcement of Google.org saying they're big into plug-in hybrids. Then get into an area related, which is after I've force-fed you all this stuff, talk about business models, my hypothesis that technology is not the key, it's business models. Talk about examples of new paradigm business models, and then give you some thoughts for Googlers. So cutting to the chase, I believe diesel, not gasoline engines, this thing called BTL, or biomass-to-liquid, or more technically known gasification of biomass and fischer-tropsch liquids. And then finally, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles in any case. Plug-in hybrids, I believe, are the 85% solution, and biofuels is the 15% solution. If you add that together, you got 100%, right? So I won't go through all the risks and context, but the time is very ripe for things to happen. Despite the demagoguery, fear, apathy, mendacity, self-interest, or ignorance, I'm probably part of that too, it's hard to ignore. Funding spigots are open for alternatives, and for the clever, I think there's a way to make a buck and save the world. So some disturbing facts. You've probably seen this famous thing, which is over the last 1,200 years, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been pretty stable, and then guess what happened once we industrialized? It's going off the roof. Now, cause and effect is, the Bush administration might argue cause and effect, but it's interesting. Now, I'm sorry for this really kind of difficult slide, but I couldn't steal it from anywhere else other than badly done. But this basically shows temperature variations. It's a standard deviation against a mean, and what you can see is approximately every 200,000 years or so, or maybe I've got that wrong, you get dips and you get peaks. And so, as part of, I'll tell you about myself, as part of talking to the people, that don't believe in global warming, I say to them, hey, even if you don't believe in it, we're in a warming trend and it's gonna hit you hard. And as you remember those hot days back there, they tend to make people vote differently, scream differently, things like that. So even if you don't believe in global warming, I think it's going to warm up and people are going to make the obvious choice or decision of why. So you can tell how, you all know about Canadian oil sands or tar sands as they're called in some places. They're actually technically different, but I won't get into it. But Canada is Saudi Arabia. Thank goodness our friends. There's a break even at $40 to $50 a gallon, and you can't sequester.
Gallon or barrel?
Sorry, you're right, barrel, thank you. Please jump in. This was at 2 a.m., so I'm not gonna get it all right. And you can't sequester in vehicles. And one of the things that people don't understand is this process itself uses a lot of water. So you can see how bad it is for Canada in the sense that you can't even take a clear picture anymore on the right. No, actually, that's just a bad screenshot. So another kind of issue that is probably politically based or maybe self-interest based of us is what is the true cost of petroleum? And so the best I can see in the literature and popular is if we really paid for incorporated all the externalities of petroleum, we'd be paying $7.50 to $15 a gallon, which sounds a lot like what they're paying in Europe, at least on the downside of that. And unfortunately, the statistics say people don't change their driving patterns. So who was the one who said, I'm a software guy during the day and a would-be economist at night? Is that person here that asked that question of Vinod? Basically, there's zero demand elasticity, so that's not good. Some people would look at this as corporate average fuel economy standards. Some people would look at this as failure, meaning we haven't regulated our way into making cars more efficient for the last 25 years. Well, first of all, cars are incredibly more efficient. It just goes into running all the parasitic loads, meaning tape decks, ice coolers, whatever else, right? They're incredibly efficient. They're incredibly cleaner. It's just there's more cars and there's more junk that we plug into our cars. And so what you can see is, I think the positive thing is regulation itself, if we could ever get it there, is very powerful. Look what happened when you regulate, at least the 1982 and prior. So whirlwind tour of transportation, it started with your feet 7 million years ago as the humanoids got going, and it ended kind of the last technological innovation was the diesel vehicles, with diesel engines itself being invented in 1900. So a quick vehicle comparison, again, as part of the drink from the fire hose. A spark ignition engine or a gasoline engine operates at low compression versus a diesel engine that the fuel self-ignites at high temperatures. And the fuel itself, if any of you have taken the chemistry or remember back to it, it's shorter chain carbon atoms versus at C6 to C9, octane, C8, remember your Latin, C14 to C18 for diesel fuels. And as I'll show in a slide, that's what plant oils are. They're magically at that, applicability. So people say, well, the diesel, it's not fair. There's more energy in the diesel, so you should discount for that. And I say, well, there's more diesel, and that's a bad thing that there's more energy in it. And then vehicle costs, of course, for gasoline and diesel versus electric, and then hydrogen, are significantly different. Infrastructure costs, gasoline, diesel, no difference. And my dear friend, I'm sorry, it's my whipping post. Other than ethanol, is like $200 to $400 billion of infrastructure that would need to make it happen. Range is the killer for electric vehicles. I don't know what Alec might say about that. And then miles per gallon, these are approximate X's on either one. But my short answer is, diesels are, you have that efficiency gain of about 30%. So the compression ignition engine, the diesel engine, was demonstrated by Rudolf Diesel in the 1900s, and it was run on rancid peanut oil. So unfortunately, the diesel engine, to contain that heat and to contain that compression, had to have a lot of metal around it. So we needed to wait for 100 years until high-tech metals could make the engine actually lighter. And so there's 30% better fuel economy, which is nice, high torque at low speed, which is, I would argue, or I think the statistics show how people buy their vehicles is they want the giddy up and go, I guess you would call it. And then in the 1930s, the first implementation of a diesel engine in a vehicle was taking a boat engine and putting it into a big limousine that could barely fit it. And so today, trucks primarily use it because they need high torque at low speed to get those the big vehicles going. So, it's not unrealistic to look to Europe and what they're doing in diesels. I mean, there's a huge penetration of light-duty vehicles in Europe, up to 70%. And why? Because of fuel economy and their concerns, because they don't have, their own oil, and on top of it, for performance reasons. And then, just some more statistics of, if you wanted to look at CNG figures, they're just like a blip on the radar screen if you're fans of that technology. But either way, diesel is not something new and it's not something crazy. It's just not over here, and there's some reasons in terms of, California Air Resources Board, blah, blah, blah. I can get into that maybe in the questions section, but you cannot buy a new passenger diesel vehicle in California today. It's got to have 7,500 miles on it, and there's a whole secondary market of 7,501 miles of used vehicles. So again, you can see in this example kind of an apples to apples gasoline 2.0 liter and a diesel, significant more torque, and acceleration's the same, and then fuel economy, it's nice to have. And then how many people, here's my second kind of series of questions. Who was born prior to 1976 in this room? Oh, wow. How come all the adults showed up? You remember the old diesels, they are dirty and slow. Well, they're not that anymore. They're absolute rocket ships. People love them. And, again, I'd love to sell fuel economy and make the world, join hands and sing. But this is kind of how people in America buy cars, so it's not a bad thing. So now let's talk about a whirlwind tour of fuels. It all started with food, and then it started with fodder. If you know what fodder is, it's the stuff you feed animals. Then the battery came along, at least invented, then food for the bicycle, and then rail, a series of things. Oil, Edison Electric, diesel engines starting on peanut oil, electric vehicles, coal for the most part, gasoline vehicles, gasoline, diesel vehicles. Diesel in the 1940s, they realized, hey, we could put a thing called biodiesel, which I'll talk about in a second, into it and overcome some of the issues of just putting plain vegetable oil straight into it, which it works also as long as it's not coal. So the other thing too is this is nothing new, at least in terms of the present circumstance about foreign source petroleum issues. 1970s and 80s, it was all about ethanol. And I would just suggest it's kind of all about ethanol again. 1980s methanol, which had the disadvantage of being highly toxic, but that didn't bother some people. 1990s, the 2000s, the gaseous vehicle, if you want to call it that, alternative. Electricity, some people know a lot about that in this group. And then kind of hydrogen. And, this is my one Jones is like, my one Jones is who's going to accept responsibility for hydrogen in that it's taken all the oxygen out of kind of alternatives, and boy, it's a real tough sell, particularly if you buy my logic that biofuels combined with plug-in hybrids is the way to go. So this just simply to show kind of this is the chemical formulation of these various subcomponents of natural plant oils, and you can see C16, C18, C18, that's diesel fuel. So it's pretty, and these are just percentages of that. And then there's a million, there's kind of the resources, the conversion technologies, the fuels that they can be turned into, and I would say a lot of people miss the fact about what vehicle you put it into, and you need to go forward and backward off of the capabilities of the various vehicles. Biodiesel itself, think of the old-time soap-making process. If you take plants or animal oils and you put them with a catalyst and you add alcohol, you get biodiesel. Again, you gotta, if you're gonna use like restaurant grease, you might have to screen out the burritos or something like that. So that's, immaterial on the thing here. If you add water, you get soap. So, advantages in terms of energy balance, there's subsidies out there, at least through 2008. Disadvantages is, and I'll show this in a second, there's significant limitations in terms of feedstock. I mean, it seems like 7 billion, if you took all the Malaysian palm oil in the world and turned it into biodiesel, and nobody got to eat of the people that are dependent on that, then there'd be 7 billion gallons of biodiesel. Unfortunately, we use 40 billion for this country alone, so, you know, and on the top of the ethical implications of using food for fuel. And here again is, let's say you were starting a business in biodiesel in California, you know, the 5th largest economy in the world, depending on, you know, whether the French are making cheese that month or not. And what you've got is you don't have a lot that's really available for biodiesel. And so much as I love it, and if you've got a local Chinese restaurant willing to give it to you, and you wear eye protection like your mom told you whenever you were playing with lye or something like that, it's great. But in terms of the future, it's really difficult because we use, in this state alone, about 4 billion gallons of the stuff diesel-wise and about 40 billion in the country. So now ethanol. Now, it's without you know, kind of competition, nothing's fun. So I call ethanol the hydrogen scam light. It seems to make a lot of sense, but just fundamentally, as you put all the pieces together, it makes a lot of sense for certain people. It's, you know, easy in the sense that GM doesn't have to do anything, which is always nice for them, and other than put a gas cap on or spend $200 extra or something like that. But ultimately, what you have is you have sugar, which is really easy to turn into ethanol because you just go through the fermentation step, or you have these other complex sugars, which include a thing called hemicellulose, which is just a matrix loosely bound of sugars, cellulose, a more intense matrix, harder to break up, or lignin, which is at best you're going to burn it for processed fuel or something like that. So you need to do hydrolysis, which is acid, heat, and or enzymatic treatment. And my argument of this talk is we can have this, the future is today, or you can bet on the future, which, you know, that's the inherent nature of this company here, but we need solutions fast. And if you take it all into account, you know, enzymes that are very specific, that haven't been invented yet, that require homogeneous feedstocks, which is not the case, that's a big jump. So one of the things I think is worth talking about is I call it, you know, after my inflammatory remark about ethanol, or I think another inflammatory remark about hydrogen, the Brazil Fallacy, right? Just because Brazil is on the equator, has all the sugar cane you could want, does not mean that is a good reason to think about ethanol for the United States. Somebody in this room asked about kind of the longitudinal issues of, this is in the Khosla lecture, the longitudinal issues, meaning how far from the equator and is ethanol right for the United States. You know, Brazil is the largest land mass in the world on the equator. Unfortunately, everybody wants to put something there that, you know, if you're going to display it, you're not going to put ethanol where you grow, I mean, where you have cows or something like that. You're going to put it in rainforest if it's not already converted to ethanol. So just, you know, you can go through these issues yourself, but be very careful when, you know, they talk about selling you the Brooklyn Bridge or talking about Brazil or, you know, that type of thing. It's a special case, an entirely special case that only works with Brazil or maybe Malaysia or maybe Indonesia. And they just happen to be on the equator, which, you know, this biofuels is all about taking sun energy, putting it into a biological capture element and turning it into fuel. And so you just take it with a grain of salt. Now, what I'm pushing here is this thing called biomass-to-liquid. And basically, you take everything, you know, so remember that movie Soylent Green? Soylent Green is people, you know? And whenever my kids bother me, I say, hey, you could be biofuels too if you don't behave. You take it, you heat it at 1/3 the oxygen for sufficient combustion, and it turns into a syngas. Now, for those of you who will not give up on hydrogen, let me say this is the precursor to hydrogen, you know, the hydrogen economy. If we build this infrastructure for the creation of biomass to liquid, you know, when all the other issues are solved with hydrogen, vehicles particularly is what this is all about, this talk is all about. We've got hydrogen and CO coming out as syngas. Now there's and I think Vinod mentioned this, there is a 1920s, 1910 process called fischer-tropsch, which basically takes these separate molecules or groups of molecules and puts them over a catalyst and puts them back together into C18 diesel fuel or whatever carbon chain length you want. It just happens that the diesel fuel is kind of the most efficient way to put it together. You could make ethanol out of this, but it's a sub-optimized process. And you get what yeah, go ahead.
How many joules do you need to spend to get, you know, like 1 joule?
Yeah,
fuel?
well, what you're talking about is energy balance, which is like a gallon of, gallon of petrol in and how much energy you get out. You know, again, this is all argument. You know, the arguments are, as an example, ethanol is 0.75, meaning negative. If you add the fact that you can feed cows or livestock, you know, it goes above 1 and can go all the way. Even the people that, you know, you would think are the best you hear is 1.6 off of corn, and then biodiesel you hear about 3.6, 4, and then biomass to liquids up in the, you know, 5 to 15 range. So it's extremely efficient. And this is not me talking.
I'm not sure that was my question.
So energy balance, is that was your question?
Well, I guess my question was, you know, like, how much energy are you spending in order to make a joule of
Right. So yeah. So let's put it in terms of gallons of gasoline, right? You put, of petroleum product. You put 1 gallon of petroleum product in, and you get 10 gallons of petroleum product out. Okay. And all that comes out of the biomass that you've released very efficiently. You know, the energy that's inherent in the biomass.
Yep. You grow the biomass normally by cutting down trees or sugarcane or whatever.
Correct. Yeah, so, you know, I mean, the point of this whole thing is if you have to choose between a highly specific process that hasn't been invented yet or an omnivorous process, you know, net, you go with the omnivorous process. The difficulty of this and the advantage of this is that it's a process that, you know, it's an oil company process. This is where the oil companies come in and say, okay, we got all the money in the world, we're forced to do this or we want to do this depending on how you look at it. We're not going to get involved in biodiesel. You know, there's not enough feedstock to even worry about it. Ethanol, we're worried about energy balances and stuff like that. You know, where do we do what we do best, which is beat it with a sledgehammer? And I'm arguing, and I've heard good confirmation, you know, this is where they want to go. And I would argue, you know, FYI, please look at it.
What's different between this and using coal as your feedstock for a similar?
Right. Well, I mean, again, the original fischer-tropsch process was a coal. I mean, this was the 1920, then, you know, the World War I Germans trying to find a way to, like, get around the fact that they're at war and it's tough to get Romanian oil, and World War II Germany also, and South Africa, you know, in the apartheid region, taking all their coal resources and avoiding the apartheid things. This is the fischer-tropsch process was invented for coal, and the issue of, you know, doing it with biomass instead is it hasn't been completely invented. There are demonstration projects that are fairly substantial. VW's doing this in combination with Shell and everything like that. Now, the real issue is, and this is why this is kind of the underlying thing in terms of global warming, is if you put it's a sequestration problem. 600 million vehicles out there, all burning, right? And if you had to put your money in economies of scale scrubbing, if you want to call it that, and you had a choice between coal into vehicles made liquid or biomass into vehicles, biomass is CO2 neutral, right? So as bad as it is burning wood, right, you're actually, it's only a neutral greenhouse gas issue. Now, particulate matters and health issues and stuff like that, that's you know, the other part of the equation. So it's about carbon neutrality. That's what biofuels is all about, and guess what? What's our issue? At least if you buy kind of the summary slides right in the beginning. You have a question? So, you know, here's this makes your eyes bug out, but ultimately what it is starting with how much we use, what's that in barrels, what's that in gallons, how many BTUs is that, what's the equivalent of joules, who wanted joules here, you wanted joules, right? And in terms of percentage, I mean, basically, of all the sun that falls on the United States, including, I don't think this includes Alaska, you'd need 17% of the land mass to grow yourself at today's efficiencies in terms of photosynthesis. You'd need 17% of our land mass, right? Now, 17% of arable land mass. Now, in that case, you need 45% of arable land mass. That's what are we going to eat? What's the world going to eat if we do that? Now, my kind of goal, just my kind of rule of thumb goal is we get 12% of our oil from the Middle East. It's getting worse, but let's try that as a first. Let's just, see if we can get out of the Middle East. I mean, it's a, that's it's a world market. That's nice, but it doesn't really, ultimately oil is a problem in many ways. So this is just a simple fact of, if you talk about the efficiencies of photosynthesis, which on an aggregate basis is extremely powerful, but looking at it, plants are only 0.33% efficient to convert sun into carbon, right? Or energy. And so this whole thing is simply to say, if we were going to displace 100% today, we'd need 45% of arable land mass. If we were going to do 20%, 9%, if we were going to displace the Middle East, it'd be 5%. And this is right in line with, I do believe with Vinod Khosla in the sense that, I believe in technology, it's going to happen. But this is a function of, what if you say, somehow we need to get twice as much energy out of those plants? Well, it can be a matter of crop choice. It can be a matter of, technology. It can be a matter of diesel engines versus gasoline engines, all those type of things. And let's just say, we haven't focused on it yet. We focused on food. We haven't focused on energy crops and stuff like that. In the end of the day, if we would get a 5x improvement, and it's not, some of it's going to come from bioteching, some of it's going to come from choice of vehicles, some of it's going to come from, what kind of, energy balance we have on the production process. But 1% is pretty, I think we can do that. I don't think that's going to disadvantage anybody. And that's just a chart of the various ways to look at it.
Is biofuel carbon neutral because you can only burn out the CO2 that the plant breathed in during its lifetime?
Yeah.
What about the petroleum-based fertilizers used to grow the crops?
Good question. Yeah.
How does that fit into the equation?
Well, in terms of pollution of like the Mississippi and everything like that, that's you need to factor that into the whole thing.
Not even that. We still need to use petroleum-based fertilizers to grow these crops in the quantities needed. How do you limit? How does that affect your equation in terms?
Right. Well, that's called field to wheel or well to wheel and stuff like that. Those energy balances, I believe, are factored in.
Is it actually factored in?
Yeah, I believe those are factored in. I have to go back and take a look at it.
Fertilizer comes from petroleum. The petroleum energy is used to fix nitrogen out of the air and then potassium and phosphorus, because none of those things come from hydrocarbons.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so that you could use this instead of oil.
Sure.
To
sure.
make your fertilizer.
Yeah, you know what? That reminds me too. I mean, the questions are really good here. So I'm going to repeat them too, because that was one of the problems of listening to Vinod's talk was, oh gosh, what did they just ask? So the whirlwind tour of emissions is there's 5 regulated emissions, volatile organic compounds, which Vinod talked about. He talked about that's the problem if you go less than, or you go between E5 and E85, you've got an increase in volatiles. Carbon monoxide, particulate matter, which is really the dangerous one in terms of carcinogens. Sulfur oxides cause acid rain, all those type of things. Biofuels, there's none of that. And nitrogen oxides. The difficulty of diesel engines, because they burn at high temperatures, you take atmospheric nitrogen and you combine it with atmospheric oxygen and you get nitrogen oxides. So I need to talk about that in a second. And then finally, greenhouse gases, which is, follow the court docket about, and California Air Resources Board in the battle to see if greenhouse gases are just food for plants or, a danger that should be regulated and can be regulated. And then here's ultimately this field to wheel emissions thing that's, kind of filling in the blanks on other data that's already out there. You can see gasoline versus diesel. Diesel is kind of the 0 line or the 1 line in this type of thing. greenhouse gases increase, significantly less particulate matter, significantly less NOx, huge amount of VOCs compared to diesel, and carbon monoxide, huge amount. The dangerous one's the NOx. I mean, quite frank, particulate matter. NOx and VOCs combine to make smog. They have a certain, problem there. But, you can make, the argument is you can pump up your tires so you use less gas. Efficiency would be the greatest. You can pass CAFE standards, but really my argument here is fundamentally it's the choice of vehicles, it's the choice of what you're using the feedstocks for and the conversion thing. All these other things are actually more important, but this is kind of the policy slash, follow the banner to change the world for the better thing that you can do on a macro level. Yeah.
One question about particulates. Is that particulate count in comparison with particulate filters on ULSD or US diesel? I'm fairly certain that they have better particulate scrubbers for vehicles running ultra-low sulfur diesel,
right?
Which could significantly affect that.
Right. Yeah. The question was about the various kind of bins that vehicles go in to achieve this certain, allowance, and ultimately that it factors in through a difficult combination in terms of are they meeting their emissions control requirements, and it's a fleet average in terms of emissions and all that type of thing, and in terms of fuel economy.
Technology is available if you use a different level grade of diesel fuel.
Correct. Yeah. So one of the arguments of using biofuels, because there's no sulfur in it, sulfur ruins catalysts, so you can actually put catalytic converters on diesel vehicles, for example. I don't want to get too far into it, and you asked very good questions, but ultimately, let me leave it at that, and if you want to get deeper into that, I'll be able to not answer your question. Transportation and emissions, I kind of went into this. 600 million vehicles out there, all distributed emitters, very difficult to control. More vehicles coming with China and India coming along. And, again, biofuels are the greenhouse gas neutral, solution, and biofuels for transport, kind of beat that into your. The challenges for diesel engines, oxides and nitrogen, I already told you why diesel engines have problems with NOx, particulate matter, and then ultimately there are technologies today, some would say, there's problems with them, but, Mercedes, which is not a good example because it will be a very expensive vehicle, but in their example of, coming through with solutions first, they've got the particulate matter is solved. And in terms of the NOx reduction, you use urea and run it over a catalyst. And if you can accept that you might run out of the catalyst and thus be out of compliance, which is the enviros, if I want to call them that, have a problem with that because it's not a perfect solution. But there is no kind of major invention to get to the point where diesel engines are in compliance to gasoline engines. My underlying argument is I think the paradigm for regulation is based on spark ignition engines. So where it's hard, hard for gasoline engines to make the emissions requirements, it's easy in terms of the regulations, and where it's easy, it's hard. And because they're just different diesel engines and gasoline engines, diesels come along and they say, well, we've got everything solved except the NOx, and it's what do you want to call it, sudden death, right? It's not a holistic approach to regulation, meaning within the context of, oh gosh, 9/11 and oh gosh, terrorism fueled by oil and stuff like that. But they're actually getting it in Sacramento. It's amazing, I'm a graduate student. I've been trying to figure out what my dissertation topic is. Well, the darn thing's moving so fast, I can't find a topic because eventually they come to their senses before I can write something. And then finally, why is transportation so vulnerable? I would argue that transportation is the pinnacle of greenhouse gas control. I would also argue it's the pinnacle of, in terms of vulnerability, in terms of petroleum use and everything like that. As you can see, electricity, they're 3% dependent on petroleum, and transportation is 98%. Whoops. And as you can see, you know, transportation is the bottleneck in terms of kind of foreign source oil dependence, and again, I would argue greenhouse gases. So conclusions, implications, or a kind of sub-conclusion. Biomass is a limited and valuable resource. Transportation is the most vulnerable sector to petroleum disruption. Biomass is best suited to controlling emissions, greenhouse gases, and vehicles. BTL versus ethanol is ready and cheapest today and tomorrow, and diesel engines are more efficient and best suited for BTL. So if you follow that logic, that's what I'm trying to say here. Now, talk about plug-in hybrids. You know, just because of feedstock and land use, I think it's pretty widely acknowledged that biofuels are the 15% solution. So how are we going to get to the other 85%? And plug-ins, which we're very strong at UC Davis, we have the godfather of plug-in hybrids, Professor Andy Frank. You know, they are, in my mind, the other 85% solution. And the fact that Google.org, you know, I think gave the interview, and this wasn't an official announcement, that the fact that they're looking there is really smart. Another example of Google in the lead. I've got to compliment you. So here's the fundamentals that make plug-in hybrids, in my mind, so exciting. 80% of households drive less than 60 miles in a day. So if you can get a car that will go 60 miles on battery only, you don't use any petroleum in that day. It's got huge mile per gallon. If you don't have the time to charge, which is the big bugaboo, one of the big bugaboos of electric vehicles, it can be a vehicle like any other. It just works. You don't have that issue about I can't go, you know, the 1%, I want to go 300 miles on a tank or whatever. You know, it's there. Cold starts, believe it or not, are all the emissions in vehicles. That's it, you know? If you've got 2 cold starts in a day and you eliminate one of those, huge reductions in emissions. And then the average vehicle stays stationary 19 hours a day. So one could argue that plugging it in, I mean, if anybody who's from the cold environments where they had to plug in their vehicle, so, you know, the block heater or something like that, right? Pain in the ass or that big a deal? And now I say, what if it was 70 cents a gallon versus $3 a gallon, right? You know, it's not that hard to think that people can do it, and there's inductive charging, which is, you know, no problem. And so, whoops.
Wait, 70 cents a gallon or 70 cents a mile?
70 cents a gallon.
Equivalent energy.
Yeah.
Just the slide said 70 cents a mile. So.
Okay, sorry. 2 a.m. again. I mean, not all of this was done at 2 a.m., but the ones where I made the mistake was done at 2 a.m. So here's the fundamental things that make plug-ins so powerful, right? If we could get, you know, 80% of all Americans drive less than 60 miles in a day, put a big battery in there, downsize the electric, you know, the engine, upsize the electric, the motor, and boy, you know, there's the 85% or 80% solution. And all of a sudden, you know, it's not, oh, every solution will work. You know, we need to fund everything. We need to, you know, everything's good. We all sing kumbaya. No, this is competitive, right? There is a best solution. I'm arguing this is the best solution. And all of a sudden, biofuels, with all their advantages, becomes the only solution because we're going to need the fuel, right? And you put it into plugins. So the other thing about plugins, why it's only 70 cents a gallon equivalent is it's, you know, the fact that we use all our energy during the day and we don't use any of it at night. And the power companies, their fixed costs, they have to pay for it whether it's producing or not. And so the power companies are getting very excited as opposed to, I don't think they supported the electric vehicle that well, or it was just a different time and not that big a deal, or, you know, other issues were on their mind. You know, this is where you can peak smooth is what it's called. Now, you guys here at Google pay half on usage and another half on your peak load, right? So in theory, if we could give every of you a plug-in hybrid and plug it out, you know, valet parking at Google, and Google pays for the differential of that it's a plug-in hybrid versus an SUV or whatever you drive, hopefully not. All of a sudden, you've got a lot of power there. I don't know how many people are in this whole entire complex, 5,000, something like that. You know, so I'll show you in a second. That's a lot of power and has a lot of value. So that's another of the fundamentals. So this is not that this is confidential. It's just kind of a joke on LA Confidential, probably a bad one. But you know, these are the things that I've learned in 6 months of looking at this intensely about plugins. Nickel metal hydrides are the present best technology other than lithium ions, which has a nasty habit of catching on fire right now, which are great because they're half the weight and twice the all that you want in a battery. Nickel metal hydrides last the entire life of a vehicle, 150,000 miles. So that's one of the big issues was, did you have to replace the battery that made these non-commercially acceptable? Cost per kilowatt. What's it cost to build a nat gas electric plant? $1,500 for nat gas and $2,500 for nukes, right? So 100 kilowatts, let's say, for a vehicle, right? What does that in terms of inherent value? It's a huge amount, which I would suggest could subsidize Google, subsidizing giving you a plug-in hybrid that costs no more than a hybrid or even a conventional vehicle. That's a lot of value. If you take Intel, which I've had some discussions with, and you take their 6,000 employees in Folsom, unfortunately that probably number is less as per the news and the news, but that's the same as a 660 megawatt peaker, or has an inherent value of $990 million. So these are things that change the paradigms in terms of business models of getting this to work. The other thing is, I skipped, but grid to vehicle, vehicle to grid is all very exciting. The other, what I love about grid to vehicle down here is that what's the limitation of kind of wind and solar? It's intermittent, right? Or it only comes. So if you're a power company and you say, geez, everybody's bought batteries that are connected into the grid, I don't have to pay for that fixed cost. I just have to pay the variable cost of paying you to hook up. So I can store some of my wind energy, I can store some of my solar. It's 600 million vehicles in the world, and how many 150, 125 million here. The big battery, to get to the P60 or the 60-mile range, all of a sudden you start combining these things, and it's not just a matter of, oh, diesel engines are more expensive. Yeah, well, they pay back, you get your resale value back. Oh, plug-in hybrids, boy, that's another $10,000. Well, that's not then compared to what you would pay to have that generation possibility, and it's nothing compared to the storage capability.
So, if it makes so much sense to do these hybrids, how come we have so many gasoline electric hybrids and no diesel electric hybrids in cars?
The question was, why aren't hybrids here today? Or why are hybrids, I would argue that it's just a matter of evolution. That we've taken a detour into the hydrogen highway. Take that with a grain of salt, people that love hydrogen. Or we went too soon to hydrogen is a nice way to say it. But ultimately, the evolution is hybrids are, and the Japanese who are very incremental, hybrids is the natural evolution off of vehicles. Plug-in hybrids, I would argue, are the natural evolution off of hybrid vehicles. So
even today, we have gasoline electric hybrids like Chris, but there are very few or no diesel electric hybrids in cars. Why is that?
Well, where are you talking? And diesels aren't here at all in the entire United States, despite the fact that they're overwhelming in Europe.
But Europe doesn't have them either.
Yeah, and the other thing, somebody said it was stupid, and I appreciate that comment. There is a problem. Basically, electric motors and diesels have the same, they're essentially high torque at low speed, right? So they're not, they're not the ultimate combination. What I'm arguing in a holistic sense is, okay, you sacrifice some by going to a diesel engine. You sacrifice some efficiencies in terms of going to a diesel engine, but holistically, if you take all the pieces together, diesels are best suited for biofuels, which are best suited for, greenhouse gas issues in combination. So that's, where I'm going slightly out on a limb, and of course you'd want to see real numbers, and that's more than you're going to put out here.
It'd be nice that the diesel electric hybrid actually would work fairly well, because the diesels have good torque at low RPM, but only when their turbos are up to speed. And it's the turbo lag that actually makes them not such great performers. So a diesel-electric combo would actually be pretty good because it would be very responsive by comparison.
Hey, any support is welcome. No, the other thing too is that, you know, I mean, a more layman's approach to that really perceptive thought is that, look, diesels are faster off the line. They're not as fast as the Tesla super rocket ship for, you know, very well-heeled consumers, but they're faster than gasoline engines, you know, for the most part, and that's why the Germans and everybody else are going crazy on them. So that's a, you know, more layman's approach to, yes, diesels work. You know, sorry, I probably cut too thin a knife for that subject matter. Go ahead.
This is just piggybacking on the question before last. So is Mercedes or Volkswagen working on a hybrid diesel or turbo diesel engine? I heard a rumor.
Yes, I mean, it depends on what, you know, I take this with a grain of salt, what's working on, what's announced, and what's actual, right? You know, in our interactions with VW, for example, through the university, essentially through me, I basically said, hey, you sell diesel vehicles over here and nobody's buying, you know, you want them into this market, you should do whatever you can do. So, you know, I guess what I'm saying is the automobile companies are incrementalists like anything else. The failings of Detroit is they have no plan B. You know, I hope they change that. They don't have the money to change that type of thing. Everybody's got somebody deep in the bowels of their company working on this, or is an expert on this whole thing. But to get from ground zero to actually production ready is a big jump. And so the short answer is yes, people are working on it. But the medium answer is, you know, they're probably working on hydrogen more than they're working on this specific subcomponent. And most of them aren't going to start with diesel hybrids. I'm going, you know, I'm trying to give you a kind of medium to long-term future approach to the whole thing. Is that a satisfactory answer?
Sort of. I mean, I feel like the Priuses have been successful for several years now, and somebody at Volkswagen can easily say, look, how successful these things are. We have kick-ass diesel engines. Let's combine them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, successful and successful, right? 250,000 units in a 12 million market, right? And is it leveling off? Is it continuing? Plug-ins don't pay back in their lifetime of ownership. So have we soaked up all the green enviro people that, you know, want to look cool? The issues on, you know, Civic, the Honda doesn't sell, the Prius does. Some people say it's just because one looks cool versus the other. I think those are bad signs when you know, people aren't buying for efficiency and type of thing like that. So, go ahead.
I was going to say that Opel has a diesel electric hybrid they're building. And Opel is a unit of GM, so it's the Astra, and it's supposed to come out in like 2008 or something like that.
A lot of power in this room. Yeah, a lot of power in this room. And then finally, I would argue that plug-in hybrids are perfect for homeland security and disaster response. You know, if you ever look at the marketing material for hydrogen vehicles, it's you can go to the beach and have a rock concert, Burning Man off of the hydrogen, right? Well, you can do that with diesel you know, you can do it on battery only with plug-in hybrids type of thing. And, you know, one could also argue that the homeland security people or even the people over in Iraq, I mean, why are people screaming and yelling over there? One of the arguments is the power doesn't work. They've got plenty of oil. They need generators. We either buy them generators or we combine them in a plug-in. So again, not to belabor the point, you've seen this as a reiteration. Now, actually, how are we doing in terms of, hey Joel? 5 minutes. 5 minutes in terms of it's 55 minutes or 45 minutes? 55. Okay, good. So business model, politics, not technology is the key. My quick story of my grandfather, he was a pharmacist for 90 years. One day I look over his shoulder and he's mixing up this cream and I say, hey, Gramps, what's that? And this is old-time pharmacy where you'd custom order the thing. And he says, oh, it's a cream. I said, what's it for? He says, oh, it's for my customer, he's got genital herpes. And I go, wow, that's pretty bad. Is that just to soothe it or something? He goes, no, it cures it. I go, wait a minute, excuse me, it cures that? It's incurable. He goes, no, it's not incurable. I said, that's $1 billion product, right? And he says, no, it's not, because you need an infrastructure of compounding pharmacists. This thing's off the patent. I got it out of the library, right? And it's got low shelf life. He says that is not a commercial product, right? In the same way, biofuels, I would argue there are no, I mean, this is it's like hit it with a sledgehammer is big business, right? I would say for biofuels, the difficulty of it, it's so exciting, you can make it in your bathtub and stuff like that, is for 80% of the problem, there's no proprietary position, and that doesn't jive with business as it's done today in the venture capital world and everything like that. So actually, I love to see Google.org kind of bridging those type of problems. It's not an investment, it's a business. Pricing of petroleum is unfair, as we know. Pricing of petroleum is a boom and bust cycle. I think prices will go down, unfortunately, and just like ethanol died the first death, without subsidies, alternatives have a problem, or fair pricing, they have a problem. And things like Google.org is sorely needed. So here's something I would suggest for new paradigms for business models. I've already talked about the grid to vehicle and vehicle to grid idea to give you guys all plug-in hybrids at the cost of a regular vehicle, because Google makes money and changes the world for the better. My other idea is how do cars go into production for the automobile companies? Well, a rough way to say it is you got to have 100 prototypes that are ready to the point where they drive 100,000 miles and don't break down. So I have called this the Automotive Usability and New Technology Test Program, which is we get 100 prototypes, we drive them around the headquarters of Detroit of the major auto companies, we test them head-to-head with they're just retrofits, so they're not that fancy. They're retrofits of their original vehicles, and Google, on its website, on its homepage or, pretty close to it, anybody remember Quokka.com? These are the guys, one person back there. These are the guys that would do the world-class athlete biometrics. That's what I'd love to see at Google, right? Biometrics, meaning miles per gallon, savings, all the type of things that really people make decisions on whether cars work or not. Did they break down? Did they not break down? All that kind of stuff. So, first you want to ask nicely, but second of all, maybe the TAUNT program, aptly named, can solve that. In terms of X Prize has an automotive prize, and then I've got some ideas in terms of aggregating restaurant grease and doing what's called transit-oriented development. So these are all things that what's the technology here? I would argue there's not a lot of technology. Here's an example of kind of the oil field in Davis, where we come from. There's 108 restaurants, 69 of which produce restaurant grease. And so, again, as I said, biodiesel, there's not enough, but there's some. And, a billion gallons of displacement is better than nothing, especially when the emissions go down. And then, kind of just like with plug-in hybrids, where you sit here and say, what's the value of 16 kilowatts in a vehicle times $2,500? This is the inherent value in plug-ins. What's the value of renewable resources? And I would argue you can value that against what's the value of reserves for an oil company. And if it's domestic feedstocks, then it's, there's no risk to it. And this is just a diagram of how people say what are the risks, and you can put a number to that. So here's some thoughts for Googlers, right? My son thinks I'm a rock star that I'm coming here. So, with that spirit, you guys can change the world and are already changing it. Thank you for your products. They're unbelievable, and keep it up, right? So, again, don't be scared understanding the simple and ubiquitous mechanical technologies, right? Vehicles, fuels, distribution, and infrastructure. I would argue, this is my Jones, obviously, somebody needs to be held accountable for hydrogen. And we should not be led into our next phase of, the future by the people that, we're pushing hydrogen, because there's just some fundamental issues that people should have caught. History and fundamentals are important. Not all alternatives are created equal. There's this kind of kumbaya mentality of all alternatives are good. No, there's better alternatives than others, and I'd be, glad to go head to head and, change the world for the better and get resources to the best. follow the money when it comes to stories and credibility. You know, understand that the calling for perfection is the enemy of the good. You've probably heard that before. And, you know, even question the good guys, because the adversarial system makes for extremism and makes us go for suboptimal decisions. You know, everybody could win in theory if hydrogen would work, but where, you know, is that the solution? And I think, you know, my background, I'm as long in the tooth grad student as you're here. There's advantages of being in the 40s when you're in grad school. There's disadvantages. Consultant to a number of companies in this area. 10 years in venture capital backed life sciences, Europe finance and operations, and kind of 5 years USMC infantry officer. And that's how I got into this a mere 4 years ago. And I've, you know, not taken my education and monetized it as possible, because I was sitting on 101 in my gas guzzling SUV, looking at, you know, the waste, listening to the war news. In those days, you know, there weren't as many dead Americans and dead Iraqis at the point. And my buddy pulls up in a VW turbo diesel wagon running on used cooking grease biodiesel. And that's why I am here today, for better or for worse. And so if you have some time for questions, I appreciate it. I'll try to relay them. Some of the questions are so good, you know, it's tough to even translate them. And please go to the microphone.
Are there any of these, you said the biomass stuff you can do actually in your bathtub. Is there something that, you know, if I wanted to go out and start a cult in some, in the middle of the Midwest or something, is there something that I could actually afford that would produce this stuff?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the first issue is there enough of it? So what you want is like, you know, the Chinese restaurant central where there's nobody going to the Chinese restaurants, and you know, there's an issue of there's not enough of it. But you can make this in your bathtub. Of course, you know, I'm going to be put on record. There's liabilities and dangers in the whole thing, but you know, go to google.com and search on making this. There's plenty of people out there selling kits. There's plenty of user groups that are real friendly and trying to help you out. There's people that are producing biodiesel already. You know, they just don't send less than 300 gallons, so kind of organizing to be part of those groups is the way to get at that type of stuff. And, you know, if you want to save the fuel taxes and you've got a friend who's got a Chinese restaurant, I don't know if it works, you know, off in wherever your survivalist community, but yeah, I mean, this is, you know, this is 1900s era technology, 1900s, 1940s technology is nothing new.
Is this the best of the, is this better than, is it easier than ethanol and easier than the other alternatives?
Well, again, you know, Benet said it's just fermentation, right? So if you know, I brewed beer, you know, if you want to ferment, you know, you got to decide, you could just go to Costco. I hear it's really cheap to buy just soybean oil and you can put it right in your diesel, assuming the temperature's right? I think fermentation's more difficult than this. But, you know, it's really not a significant difference.
Just started to answer one of my questions, which is, so there's sort of two ways people use biodiesel. One is to use biodiesel that's actually been, I don't know what the term is, but you know, the lye process where it's been turned into actual diesel fuel, and the other is just to use the fuel oil that's filtered. And I've seen examples where people have additional equipment that preheats the oil. Do you think that that's a viable alternative, or is that too expensive in terms of the equipment that you have to put on?
I mean, for the people that plug in or lived up in Wisconsin or something like that, it's a block heater and a fuel line heater, right? You know, so if you don't want to have a block, if you want to run straight vegetable oil and you don't want to add the extra expense of a second tank or the block heater, I mean, or stuff like that. I mean, it's really a function of your own economics of, do you want to spend $2,000 for this or $2,000 for that?
I guess the follow-up question is there any environmental issues with the process of turning the vegetable oils into diesel fuel, in terms of like what happens to the lye when you wash it away?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a catalyst, the definition of catalyst is you recover them, but your process is so good that you're going to get the catalyst. Are there volatiles, right? I mean, it's immaterial in the greater scheme of things, but yeah, these are quote unquote unregulated emitters of emissions. And yeah, if you're really into it, which is really fun, what's your footprint on the planet, saving the world while you're, creating worse emissions than if you just went and fueled up at the gas station type of thing. I mean, yeah, you can get into all those and it will make your head spin.
Hi. I was hoping to find out more selfishly about the straight vegetable oil option because I have access to it pretty easily being a chef. And I'm interested, so partially because I'm a chef, partially because I'm interested, I'm really interested in the biodiesel option. And I know that I could get free fuel that I could just put straight into my tank. And I know I don't have time to play in my bathtub and make it, into biodiesel. So I was just wondering I was hoping to find out more about what I have to do to get a car that will run on straight vegetable oil and what are the relative benefits, or is there anything known about, how well the car will hold up over time and things like that?
Yeah, wow, good questions. First of all, don't turn around so they won't get you on tape. This young lady's in a catering for Google outfit, so I'm wondering where she could get the free vegetable oil from. Used vegetable oil. Okay, used vegetable oil, it's all about temperature, right? If you're in Arizona, you can, again, sue me and I'm on tape, right? If you're in Arizona, it all works, right? It's all a function of temperature.
I guess for the general group, is it a reliable thing to do with your engine?
A couple of Googlers already take oil from the cafe and use it.
Yeah. This is like
vehicles off the Google cafe.
In terms of the, it's really kind of, this is, what do you want to call it? Home brewing, right? You can make your own beer. You can make your own vodka. You can make your own house. Everything's possible, right? Everything's possible, kind of, and it depends on what you want to do and how much effort you want to put into it. Is it cheaper? The short answer is no. I don't think it's going to end up cheaper. It's the same thing as hybrid vehicles, right? They don't pay off in the 7 years. But that, does it empower you? Can you realize that, the society as we have today doesn't have to be that way? It's great stuff. And I'd encourage you to try it. And, also that's a political movement of people that just won't buy the system as it is, because you see what's possible and what isn't. That's a macro answer to a good question. Go ahead.
Yeah, this brought me to my own question about supply. Once all early adopters are basically taking all the Google grease and burning it, you come in and you say, oh, this is a great thing to burn vegetable oil, except there's nothing left. Has anybody done any calculations on how much supply there is? And
yeah, there's 750 million gallons if we got every restaurant in the country.
Which would supply how many cars?
Yeah, we use 40 billion gallons a year of diesel fuel in the United States.
Plus, a lot of that diesel fuel goes to the shipping industry that uses most of the diesel. The reason we don't see a whole lot, one of the reasons we don't see a whole lot of diesel cars is because most of it is used for cross-continental shipping trucks instead of either slightly more efficient rail systems, and just the fact that the country is physically so big, it takes a lot more fuel to get stuff from place to place.
Yeah, well, the 40 billion number, that's everything in there, and there's very few diesel passenger vehicles, and why? Because you can't sell them in California, and that's the biggest part of the market, and all the things that come to it. But we use a lot of diesel fuel, we use a lot of gasoline, and again, that's not the long-term, it's supply constrained in terms of kind of the technologically easiest approach, not the cheapest approach, but the technological easiest approach.
The number of vehicles brought into the U.S. every year.
Correct, and that's also a function of nation-to-nation competitiveness and all that kind of stuff. So we'll have to plug-in, there's a Fremont Toyota GM plant, I think, right? And there's nothing else in California. Why? It's extremely high price. But let's build a plug-in hybrid diesel biofuel-focused production facility right here in California. That would be great.
Can you fly a jet on biodiesel?
Yeah, well, actually, this is a really interesting thing that Benet talked about in terms of Richard Branson and his approach to putting biofuels into that. I'm a pilot. You don't test things that in flight. You know what I'm saying? Especially things that are like temperature dependent, I guess is the way to say it. You can just throw a small percentage of ethanol into any fuel. Diesel you can throw ethanol into. It's e-diesel and gasoline and everything like that. But that's just there's certain things that petroleum are absolutely spectacular for. Meaning, things that you don't want to mess up, right?
We have a jet in the company.
Oh, you have a jet in the company. So, yeah, it's a great idea. No, just kidding.
I don't know what I don't remember the chemical comparison between kerosene and aka Jet A.
Jet A, I mean, it is kind of diesel.
Yeah, kerosene is, it's slightly heavier than diesel fuel, right?
I just don't know what the compatibility of the some of the hydrocarbons is in comparison.
Yeah, no, it's diesel fuel, or we're putting jet fuel into our cars or our trucks.
We should make this a small group discussion.
Okay.
I need my laptop now.
Okay. So please come up and talk to Reed.
So thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks a lot, Reed.
Appreciate it.